Since last year's show, we've seen the introduction of the European Entry-Exit System, EES, of course, that now registers non-EU nationals each time we visit continental European countries. But there are other legal and regulatory changes on the way. And to outline what these are, and we're going to dip into a question and answer session for this session, I'm delighted to welcome Senior Partner with Travelor, Matt Gatenby. Hello.
Afternoon, Stuart. How's it going?
How are you doing? Very well, thank you very much indeed. Right, at the end of this, there'll be an opportunity for questions. But let me kick off, if I may, first of all. Perhaps an easy one to start with. Is travel and leisure over-regulated? And is the consumer benefit to business cost so far weighted in favour of customers?
Right.
Easy one.
Easy one to start with. Not so much. Well, again, thank you for having me again. Hello to everybody here. So you've come to the legal session. There is still time to leave. The exits are there and there. Hopefully this will be useful. Well, I'll answer that question. Just before I do, just to give me a sense of this as I start to answer some of these questions that we're going to get. How many people here are from industry, are tour operators or travel businesses of one industry? Okay, so that's most-ish. Right, so you may have a different view to me. I do think the travel industry is heavily regulated. I mean, I speak to lots of people from different sectors and different industries, and they say, oh, we're really, really well regulated, really highly regulated. And I say, I don't know, I think you've got some going to do as much as travel. All right, we're not dealing with dangerous chemicals and things like that, but we are dealing with something which is equally as important, which is people's hopes and expectations and dreams and their money. So it is no surprise, really, that the reason for the original rules back in 1992, if you can believe it, before that there were no specific rules or regulations about travel. It's all about protecting the consumer. We as an industry, we as businesses don't really get that much. And, you know, I don't like it, you don't have to like it, but we have to deal with it because that is the situation. It's not all bad, it's not all nothing for business, and a lot of the changes recently, which I dare say we'll come on to, have had something in it for business. But look, it's unashamedly. Remember, this is a European directive, and the Europeans in particular are very big on consumer, pro-consumer. But also make no mistake, there was one country prior to 1992 in the European Union at the time really pushing for a pro-consumer stance. No surprises, it was the United Kingdom. So there is no plans to change that, as far as I'm aware. It's going to stay with us for a while.
Okay, thank you. At the end of last year, we had the conclusion of the package travel regulations consultative process, shall we say. It was a bit long and tortuous, I think we know, but can you recap what the end result was compared to where the starting point and indeed where we thought it was going to go?
Yeah, really interesting. So again, very, very short background to that. As I mentioned before, the original rules here were 1992. That's a long time ago. And one of the kind of little lawyer jokes that I make, because I'm sad like that, is that, you know, back in 1992, you couldn't really book travel services online. Now it's kind of the other way. You find it hard to not do it online. But until 2018, the rules hadn't changed and the industry had. So there was a desire back in the lead up to 2018 to change the rules. And we got the current package travel regulations as they are now in 2018. However, as part of the 2018 launch, there was this kind of like, okay, look, we'll leave it a few years and then review to make sure we're hitting the right notes. There was this thing that happened called the pandemic, which kind of put a bit of a break on everything in all our lives. So it kind of, after that, there was a review, there was a kind of request to the industry to give us your thoughts. How are the package travel regulations doing? Well, not so well. And part of that was with COVID in mind, you know, how did it perform through that? And at the same time, the Europeans were going through the same process because we'd Brexited in the meantime. So you've got these two sets of rules, the UK package travel regulations and the EU package travel rules as well. And I think it's interesting that the Europeans have just finished their consultation and launch, and there are a whole swathe of changes to the rules. Again, mostly pro-consumers, but you're probably talking 15, 20, something like that, different changes to improve, modernise. And I've got my views on them. Now is not the time, but most of them are pretty sensible, it has to be said. For the UK, when they first came out with their proposal, they started out with, I think, 11 different proposals. And there was some quite interesting stuff there. But we ended up with two So very little compared to kind of what was expected and what the Europeans are doing, if that is a yardstick to judge against. So what we've ended up with is actually two things. Number one, for anybody who knows what they are, and that's not many people, linked travel arrangements, which was this kind of, you've got packages, and then just below that you had linked travel arrangements, which was a regulated way of doing businesses. They've basically gone the way of the dodo. And then the other change that the UK is bringing in kind of any time now, actually, is trying to strengthen the ability of a tour operator and organizer to get money back from suppliers. So let's make no bones about it. That's pretty much directed towards airlines who have been problematic, recently, Middle East, before that, pandemic, and then, before that, any other incident that you might want to talk about. But they're not the only ones. So a strengthening of the words to kind of, because a tour operator, if you are an organizer, you are responsible for the acts and omissions, as we say, for your suppliers. So if, for instance, you're getting sued, it's not actually something that you as a business has done. It's likely your supplier, the hotel, the tour company, the transfer, etc., etc. So it's strengthening that wording. So, there was a big list. We've come down to very little. I think they are punchy. I think they will make a difference. But a lot of people are saying, well, that's an opportunity lost on a number of fronts.
And from that, what do you think are for those in the audience today who are involved in that side of the industry? What's the key takeaway? I mean, I'm thinking everybody's doing this already, but what's the timeline for those changes been implemented, or what's the framework for that now?
Okay, so from a UK point of view, the changes have just been laid before Parliament. So now you're into a highly interesting conversation about how laws are introduced and whatnot, which I will spare you. But basically, that's all got to be done by June. And then there is a timeline in place. You're looking at the end of this year, maybe early next year, for final implementation. Again, we've been saying to the Department for Business and Trade, who oversee all this, what do you want to do about the kind of transitional period? Because whilst the changes are not massive, if you are affected as a business, you want to kind of know, how does all that work? And we've yet to get that. I'm big at making a song and dance about kind of guidance from government departments. They sit there making the rules, kind of behind closed doors. The least they could do is kind of say, look, this is how we think it's going to work. And we're giving you an indication as to what we think. But basically next 6 months or so. But again, what I'm finding is these things either affect you or they don't. And I would say probably for the majority of people, A, in the industry, and B, here today, Stuart, probably not that big a change, which I think is good because, we all crave for a bit of consistency so we can get on doing the good stuff of just selling and providing a good service. And, as much as it might be good for the lawyers, when there are changes, I think this industry deserves a nice long period of just kind of like no changes and being able to get on with it.
Do you feel that these changes actually affect the way that consumers engage with businesses, or it's just something in the background? It's there for the small print, it's there for the businesses to highlight activities if they need to, but for the consumer, is that changing the way they behave?
I think it does. I think it does because, again, there are any amount of studies out there which I can't quote any, but talking about what consumers see in terms of the value of particularly tour operators. And you quickly get into the things like badges like atoll protected for flights, but also organisations, associations, and what they do. And there's a few here today, AGTO amongst them. And I think consumers are very concerned about holidays are, again, quoting from studies I don't know, but typically the second biggest purchase of the year, first biggest purchase of the year, kind of behind cars and houses, kind of the biggest amount of money people often spent in advance. So they do care about kind of what happens and how that industry is regulated. And, certain newspapers, maybe slightly tabloid-esque, they love running stories about, holiday business has failed. That seems to get clicks, it seems to get tractions. And that's a terrible thing to do, but it just shows that there is an interest in that. So I think it does make a difference. And I think consumers want to know that the industry that is, again, fulfilling their kind of dreams and hopes and giving them their week away or 2 weeks away a year, and that they are giving money to, is well looked after and the companies are doing a good job. So part of that is you all, and you do a good job. But again, having the kind of law and regulation behind it is not a bad thing. And I think it does count for a lot.
Yeah. So moving away from the package travel regulations aspect of legislation, what else is coming through that we need to be aware of?
Well, I mean, you mentioned it a second ago, Stu. You've got things like ETIAS and EES, but it's not really a legal thing. We've talked a lot about it in previous years, but it's more an operational thing. But again, I still think for anybody who's not aware, just make sure you are where you need to be on that, because I have this horrible feeling it's going to get worse before it gets better. But outside of that, from a purely legal point of view, there have been some of the changes. Typically, laws that have been introduced that are not travel specific, like the package travel regulations are, or that things like the ATOL regulations are for flights. You've had recently the Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Act, which has a lot to say about a lot of different things. It's across all sectors, but in particular, it's ended up with the Consumer and Markets Authority, who regulate that, who enforce that particular law. They love the travel industry, or they love spending time looking at the travel industry, and they really have a bee in their bonnet about some of the things that we do, unreasonably and unfairly, I think. But there's been a lot of talk recently about how price, it sounds boring, but it's so important, how prices are displayed, and that whole piece about, right, okay, if you are a consumer, we want you to be able to see a travel business, and this really applies abroad, but it could apply to the UK as well for things like coach trips. Yes, you as a holiday company have a price. Say it's £500 per person, £1,000 per person. They want you to also display to the consumer, for instance, if you arrive at destination and there's a local tax or levy, eco tax or something, what that is as well. And it's an offence if you don't. And they are looking at this, and they will be looking for people to kind of crack down upon and use as sacrificial lambs to make the point. And the more that this kind of thing happens, where you get local taxes, and you see that in the UK, even with cities, imposing these things, it's more and more of an issue. So again, it's just being aware of that. It may affect some businesses more than others. But again, when you've got the actual regulator kind of like putting out news stories saying, we will take action, and them having the power to kind of like launch criminal proceedings against you, I think you've got to sit up and take notice, at least be aware of it. I don't want to be scaremongery, but like those risks are there and they are real, and it's happening right now.
Do you foresee then that new regulations, when they come in, there will be a clampdown, or there is an opportunity over a period of time for businesses to get used? Is it one of those regulations that is absolutely there from day one, regardless, and you must be on the button to get it right, or not?
Well, certainly in the past, things like the package travel regulations, when new things have come in, the government, it depends which department, depending upon which law. But for the package travel regulations, it's the Department for Business and Trade. They've been pretty good and kind of said, look, here's when it's going to launch. And, we're going to give people, even though well in advance, often a year or 2 years in advance, we're still going to give you 3 months, 6 months of kind of leeway to get on board. And I think that's fair enough. There's always someone who I speak to very late in the day who says, well, what's all this about? It's like, look, I can't help you if you're not paying attention to the industry and the laws that affect you as a business. There's enough out there now. For things like the DMCC, we're kind of past that. It came into, it's staged actually the way it comes in, but it basically came into effect from what we would care about this time last year. And then there was guidance put out by the Competition and Markets Authority in November, particularly about travel and leisure. And again, it spans quite wide because they're into things like, things that they should be looking at, like there's no constant ticket promoters here, is there? Things like that, and booking fees there and all that kind of stuff. So covering a wide thing. But from their point of view, they've done that. They also gave what, in their view, was a very gracious 3-month kind of leeway period from November. So, you don't have to be a mathematician to work out we're now well on the other side of that. But to answer your question, yes, there usually is a little bit of lead in time. Again, it's just being aware, and it may not affect you, but as long as you know what that side of it is doing, it gives you time to get your ducks in a row.
One of the concerns, I think, in recent years, certainly at a show like this, you come across, possibly not people who are at the show, because those who are at the show understand the importance of getting things done properly. But out there in the wider world, there are one or two organisations who, perhaps not so much now, but weren't following the regulations properly. And that means an unfair playing field for those who are spending the time and money and investing in getting it right.
Yeah.
Is there, well, I say your experience of that, but what can anybody do if you spot someone who isn't playing the game fairly? Because it is unfair, and those who are doing it right are penalised or can be penalised as a result.
I think that's a very shrewd point, actually. And I think, unfortunately, as we go on, there's more and more of that about. A good example of this is if you are, say, a UK-based tour operator, you have all these rules. The rules are really about who you sell to, because the rules are about if you sell to our people, here in the UK, and the Europeans will look at it the same way. If you're selling to our people, then you follow these rules. You don't have any choice. So if you're a UK-based tour operator and you flout those rules, you don't, no one here, but if you don't comply with those rules, you're reachable. But there are a number of companies, and I think this is to your point, Stuart, who are currently doing exactly the same thing, but with the world getting a smaller place from a commerce point of view, they might be based elsewhere, South America, Middle East, Australia, wherever. And if they don't follow the rules, what are the powers that be here going to do about it? Because it's hard, it's easy to kind of come and knock on your door in your office in Leeds or Birmingham or wherever, London. Less difficult to get those people. And it does lead to an unlevel playing field. So we've had any number of, I think, look, I don't want to promote a kind of like spy on your competitors type of thing. But on the other hand, if you have a competitor that's not doing things the right way and you are, you've got every entitlement in the world to be able to report that competitor to the powers that be and ask them to take action. And look, I've got a lot of time for organisations or departments like the Department for Business and Trade and the DFT and things like that. They don't seem to have as much impetus to crack down on that kind of thing. And they probably don't have as many powers because they would say behind closed doors, well, what do you want me to do with a company based in Dubai? We can't get them. So they look to kind of get the lower hanging fruit, which is, a business based somewhere in the UK. So that's the problem identified. I wish I had a better solution to it. But I think, look, there are routes to be able to say to the regulators, we think this company is doing it wrong. Please, can you have a look? That's fair play.
In a moment, we'll be opening up for questions from the floor, and I'm sure you might have some. But this morning, we've heard a couple of presentations that have picked up on generative AI and using AI tools like ChatGPT and others to find the answers to understand what regulations are out there. But there's a danger in doing that, I'm sure, because how do you know that what you're being told, although we have been sort of reassured this morning that, if the information you're getting is getting better and better. But where's the risk in using AI to find answers in this particular activity?
This is a great legal question, and I could bore you all for hours on this. Here's my takeaway. Here's my big thing for travel businesses. One of the questions you'll get and Ollie did a good thing just now on AI and kind of marketing and stuff. One of the questions you'll get from people on this is, hands up if you use AI yourselves. Right. I actually didn't ask for that, but good on you for being proactive, but don't worry, you'll get your chance. Hands up if you are a travel business and you do use AI in your travel business now in any way, shape or form. Yeah. I'm not going to ask anyone the opposite question, which is hands up if your business doesn't use it, because then I would say you're almost certainly wrong. Because it's so accessible. So you get individuals within a business who might be using AI for marketing or writing itineraries or just back end kind of stuff. It's good for finance and accounts, for kind of helping with that kind of thing, I am told. But here's the thing. If you are using AI, you are responsible, because from a legal point of view, it's like bringing on a new person to do that job, right? And you're using AI instead. So if you bring on a person and they do a terrible job, they write the itinerary wrong, they get their sums wrong, they use someone else's image without their permission, and suddenly you've got a kind of nasty lawyer coming at you saying, you've used our image, we want €8,000, all that kind of stuff. What makes you think it's any different if AI is doing that? I can tell you for sure, it makes no difference. So my big takeaway from this is, look, I'm all for AI. In no way, shape or form am I saying don't use any form of AI, generative or not. But you have to be aware. I'm not also big on kind of policies and procedures and stuff, but you've got to tell the team what they can and can't do when they're using AI. Because if you say you want to use, you're okay with them using it, well, tell them what applications they can and can't use. Tell them what the limits are, or tell them that they can't use it. Because if you don't tell them, and we've seen this, where someone in marketing has been using ChatGPT or Claude or something to put some amazing stuff together, But the higher ups, the business didn't know. Well, it ain't going to make any difference if, someone comes after you for misuse, etc., etc. So I think it's having something in place to tell people what they can and can't do, and then they know. That's kind of it from my point of view, because I think that is the biggest thing that we see. It's not the use of, which is still, it's happening, it's growing. It's when people actually don't know it's happening.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have a